Hi, good evening, everyone who's joined us today. We welcome you all to the 8th edition of City Scripts. I'm Asha Jeena and I'm part of the IHS Word Lab. And along with the library, we host City Scripts, which is our annual writing festival. Before we begin this evening session, just a few things for everyone to keep in mind. Please post your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. We'll be recording this session and it'll be made available on the IHS YouTube channel. So we'll share the link for that. And if you'd like to stay updated with our upcoming events, you can just drop us your email ID in the chat and we'll add you to our mailing list. The opening session is an author conversation with Annie Zaidi on her book City of Incident, a novel in 12 parts. And she'll be in conversation with Indira Chandrasekhar. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Annie Zaidi is the author of City of Incident, Prelude to a Riot, which received the Tata Literature Live Award for Fiction in 2020, and the editor of Unbound, 2000 Years of Indian Women's Writing. She received the 9 Dots Prize in 2019 for an essay that was developed into Bread, Cement, Cactus, a memoir of belonging and dislocation. Dr. Indira Chandrasekhar is a scientist, fiction writer, literary curator, and founder and principal editor of Out of Print magazine that publishes work bearing a connection to the Indian subcontinent. A collection of her short stories, Polymorphism, was brought out by HarperCollins in 2017. Thank you both so much for joining our opening session. And over to you, Indira.
Thank you, Asha. I hope I'm audible to all. Yes, how nice to be here. And good afternoon, Annie. Greetings from Bangalore. And good afternoon to everyone out there who's watching from anywhere. A big thank you to technology for making this conversation possible. I mean, and to all the people who make technology happen and sustain it. I don't think we ever really acknowledge that. So, may I say how pleased I am to be part of this year's City Scripts, organized by the Indian Institute of Human Settlements. It focuses on literature and writing and books. And it's particularly special that the opening session of this urban festival, this urban writing festival, has fiction at its center. For I believe that the nuance and the insight that fiction provides gives us an entry into thinking about city and settlement and individual and the complex relationships between all of these entities. Annie, as always, a pleasure reading your work, City of Incident, which is going to be the focus of today's conversation, but I'm sure we'll talk about other bits of your work as well. This is from the IIHS library, which is kind of nice, an additional small connection. As I said to you in an email in preparation for this conversation, your control of a narrative is so strong and yet so light that you don't even know as a writer when the story has entered your psyche, but it really does in a deep way. And well, particularly with City of Incident, I lived in Mumbai for many years. And so there's a special resonance I felt reading this, a sense of belonging. But I think the thing about the book is, I suspect even someone who doesn't know Mumbai, who's never lived there, will feel they recognize spaces and places and feelings and characters in your novel. So congratulations on such a fine piece of work.
Thank you so much, Indira. Thank you. And I really wish I could have been there in Bangalore. It would have been lovely to do this in person, but I'm also glad, like you, that technology does make this possible.
Yes. So there are many questions I have for you, Annie, and for those of you out there about her discipline, her practice of writing. She's prolific. And with this novel, because I have a special interest in the short story, I write short fiction, I run a short story magazine. I also have a lot of questions about form and about narrative and about structure of the book. And we may get to some of those questions at the end if time permits. But in today's conversation, for City Scripts, I thought, and we agreed actually, that we would focus on the city, in particular on the great metropolis of Mumbai, where the story is set. So Mumbai, everybody knows, a huge population. I looked up some official numbers in 2023, 2.1 crore, that's 21 million people. I'm sure it's much more than that. Peculiar linear geography, constrained, it's an incredible density of people. But the thing that makes Mumbai, one of the things that makes Mumbai so dynamic is the great artery of the city, which is provided by the suburban train system. And that is central to the narrative in City of Incidents. So could you talk about this, Annie, about the trains?
Thanks, Indira. Yeah, I don't name Mumbai in my novel, but I think anyone who reads it immediately knows that that's the city that it's set in. And trains are a big part of it. Trains were a big part of my experience of Mumbai. And I think most people, particularly people who live in the suburbs, that even before that, if you'll give me 1 second, I think the light's gone off. I'll just be back in 1 second.
Yes, take your time.
I'm really sorry, these automated lights, if you'd sit very still, the light goes off on its own. Right, I'm really sorry. So to come back to the question of trains, trains are a lifeline quite literally, I think, also because it's not just people, it moves goods too. And goods in the sense of, we don't think of them as goods, but for instance, fish. When I moved to the city I moved there in 99. I had visited a couple of times before, but in 99, I moved there to study at the Xavier Institute of Communication, which is in South Mumbai. And I was at that time living in the suburbs, not the very distant suburbs, but the suburbs. And then I moved out to the really distant suburbs, to Mira Road, which is technically not in the municipality of Mumbai, but, you know, effectively it is Mumbai because that's how people commute and live. In commute terms, it's just under an hour. In train terms, it took me about an hour, sometimes an hour and a half to actually get to where I needed to go. When I picked up my first reporting job, sometimes you had to do early morning shifts and late night shifts. And the morning shifts were called, well, we used to use a play on words and call them morning trips. And the late night shift was called the graveyard shift. So I also got to see parts of the city that a lot of people don't, in the sense that I commuted at the extreme, the first train and the last train sort of timings. And if you travel on the first trains, the thing that you notice is the fish, that people carry fish, fresh fish from one end of the city to the other. And flowers. Lots of people just, flowers come into the city from different parts. And in the last train, I would often see, at that time, bar dancing was still legal at the time. So you'd see lots of bar dancers, lots of quite marginal professions, I would say, sort of barely tolerated and yet very much a part of the city. And I think that really shaped me as a person. And it shaped my idea of who the city belongs to, who is in the city, what am I doing in the city. It was very useful to me as a journalist too, because it shaped my worldview and it shaped my engagement with the city, that, who is necessary to it, who is barely tolerated, who is used, who is abused, that sort of thing. And I think that to me, certainly as a professional, trains were absolutely vital, not only because I was a journalist, but I was a journalist on a very small salary. For students, initially you had the student pass and you were paying almost nothing, which compared to other megapolises, you look at New York, you look at London, the tube is the most effective way of getting around, but it's nowhere near as cheap as it is in Mumbai. So Mumbai's train systems were cheap, but also dangerous because our trains were old and the train doors wouldn't close. So people hang at the train doors. That makes it much more liable to accidents, and accidents did happen a lot. I remember reporting about it. At one point, there was, I think it's slightly better now, but for various reasons, there was almost an accident a day, like hundreds over the course of the year, with people just being cut down because they were crossing the tracks or because they were hanging outside. Sometimes people used to try and climb up on the roof of the train from it was a Virar train or something. There's also the sense of danger. And I think with cities and with cities with populations, like you mentioned, I didn't know it had grown to that much, 21 million people. No matter how many trains you run, it's never going to be enough.
Yes.
And yet without the trains you can't do, because imagine if all those people tried to do this in cars and vehicles, the city wouldn't move at all. We would come to a standstill.
Yes.
So there is the sense of both necessity and threat and risk, which I associate with trains.
And that comes through very much in your very dramatic opening chapter, that violence that the train allows, and the threat, the danger, the sense of uncertainty, the mystery, the fear, the release, all of those things are already present in your first chapter as you enter the book. It's fantastic. I was reading, I mean, the whole thing also about the train is the geography. Like most cities maybe, but certainly most Indian cities, every geography has its own character and its own sense of self, its identity. And yet the train sort of disrupts that and connects that. It's very interesting. And I was recently reading an article by an American architect called Stephen Hole. I think it was in Domus, I'm not sure. But anyway, it was about the haptic aspect of architecture, that is the sense of touch, and how different materials impact and define your experience of the space or a structure. And that, of course, is a very individual experience. One might almost say a luxurious or an indulgent experience. But it's not really true, is it? I mean, I was very touched by your description of the man. It's a paragraph or so of a wife thinking of her husband building a shelter for his family in the book. It's so beautiful. You say it took 6 months to gather the right sort of plastic, rags, and broken bits of wood, arching, weaving, and knotting, to turn the material into a home, and a home that meant something. So, there's also that feeling that the city, as you already mentioned, is belonging to everybody. In your book. But that idea of the haptic sense, the idea of experiencing space and material, led me to think about what the actual experience of riding on the train is like. And you have this beautiful segment in the chapter titled Salesgirl Rides the Footboard. And I think for those of you who are listening, all the chapters have the most marvelous names, little stories in themselves. And through that reading, and through that segment, you allow the readers a glimpse into the experience of actually being on the train. I wondered if I might ask you to read that, Annie, if you could.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll just read a couple of pages from here. The salesgirl is, well, I'll just begin with the first line. This woman is so transparent, the evil eye cannot fall upon her. Perhaps the evil goes right through her body, falling on the person standing right behind her in queue for the renewal of a second-class pass. Not that she travels second class, she travels first class bindas. Who can challenge her? She wears sleeveless tops and big dangly earrings, just like a college girl. She has an office job and a faux leather handbag with a Hello Kitty clasp that she polishes once a week with Brasso. Nobody would look at her and say that she doesn't look first class. Besides, in the terrible crush of the morning, no ticket examiner dares enter the compartment. No commuter could be expected to reach into her purse to extract a ticket or a pass. All arms are trapped, pressed, and pinned down by a dozen other arms and shoulders. All the ladies must suck in their bellies and squash each other's breasts as they make their way from seat to aisle to door. There is safety in such crowds. Even so, she's aware that luck is on her side. Night after night, she travels in the first class coach when it is near empty. In 4 years, not once has any ticket examiner shown up and asked to see her ticket. For this, she is grateful. Also for the cop who is on duty in the ladies' compartment after 9 o'clock. His khaki uniform made her nervous at first, she being a lawbreaker of sorts. However, as the weeks went by, she decided that his presence was further evidence of her good luck. She feels safe no matter how late she travels. The best time to travel in this city is between 9:30 and 10:30 p.m. After that, it feels like Russia all over again. At 11 p.m., gents are allowed to board the second-class ladies' coach. But the ladies refuse to be squashed into any coach with gents, ticket be damned. So they come pouring into the neighboring coach, the first class, which is reserved for ladies all 24 hours. This is usually the family crowd, mothers with children in tow, big noisy groups. These women know none of the unspoken rules of train etiquette, how to sit, how to stand, where to get off. If you snap at them, they expect sympathy. They expect you to give up your seat just because they're carting babies. She makes it a point to turn her head away, smiling the barely restrained smile of the long-suffering. She has learned how to do this from the first-class ladies. I'll stop there.
Thank you. So that very much alludes to the point you made about both the safety and the danger, I think, of being on the train. Somewhere else, you also have this wonderful description of standing on the step of the train and feeling the wind and holding on to the steel bar. That's wonderful too. People, you must go and get this book and read it. Well, the other one of the other things I think which is so significant in a city, perhaps it's experienced in different ways in different settlements or collections of humanity. But I think a city particularly has an aspect of alienation, that sense of being not part of something, even though you're part of a rushing milieu of things. And that impacts city dwellers and has both a positive and a negative aspect. I think I remember my mother's older sister went to live in Mumbai, and we come from this large family. There's always something happening, and she was so happy. She just reveled in the isolation, of being by herself and having some control over her time and her space and her life. But it can also be very negative. But before we get to the negative, I also wanted to draw attention to a young Kannada writer whose work I'm currently translating, Dadapir Jaiman. Maybe he's even tuned in, I'm not sure. And the first story of his collection, which is won all kinds of awards, the collection is called Neela Kurunji. And he has the sentence, he has all sorts of wonderful bits which allude to the experience of being in the city and that isolation. But he says that it's rarely acknowledged that the draw of a city lies in the mix of love and anonymity that it offers, a mix that gives one the strength to overcome anything, according to him. And so that very much made me think about this idea of moving into a city and first experiencing the freedom and the isolation the city provides. would you like to talk about that? And there's some wonderful readings one might suggest also in this context. So yeah.
Yeah. I think I love the anonymity of big cities, and Mumbai in particular, because even though you end up running into familiar faces at particular places, like a particular theater, say, or a particular movie theater, or, like if you go to the places where you're likely to see people you're familiar with, you will find them. But there are also lots and lots and lots of spaces where you are completely anonymous, and the train is one of them. I often found great relief in being in those spaces cut off from strangers. I think one of the things I remember writing in cafes in Bombay because I had no office. Once I became a freelancer, I needed a place to work from. You can't work from your bed at home all the time. So I started to get out to work. And I had this experience that I could work at a cafe as long as it was a cafe where my friends did not work. So I had to keep moving cafes because once the anonymity is lost, it does something to your brain. If you are being watched, if you feel you are being watched, if there's too much familiarity, you cannot think in similar ways. And it doesn't necessarily need to be creative thinking. I'm talking about creative thinking, but I think this applies to all professions. When you're not being watched by familiar people, but you are amongst some people, you are able to think about humanity and your place in the world in a different way. Say terrible things are happening to you in your life, but then you get onto a bus and you look at 100 strangers, or 50 strangers, and none of these 50 people particularly care about what's happening to you, but then you also don't particularly care what's happening to those 50 people. If people are saying mean things to you, not only do the people not care, those people are not saying those mean things to you. Every potential stranger is a potential friend also, literally. It takes very little to spark off a human connection. You meet somebody's eye and you smile at each other. And the world of possibility is always there. It reminds you of your own potential in the world and other people's potential vis-a-vis you. So I think big cities give you that, and small places don't. There is this sense of claustrophobia. Everybody knows you. And if there's something wrong you have done, everybody knows that. And there's no escaping it in a village.
Yes, yes. And so that's really the positive aspect of the anonymity, the positive aspect. But I think in the Housewife Walks Out chapter, that alienation also has imparts a sense of loneliness, I think, which is just comes through so beautifully. I don't know. May I ask you to read again, Annie?
I will.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm reading from the middle of the chapter. I'll start from this place where she's moved to the city. They had moved to the new place with just their clothes and jewelry. Her husband had decided to sell everything else, including the four-poster bed her parents had sent as part of her dowry. He spoke of wanting to bring only new things into the new place. His own house, after all. New things could be made to fit its dimensions. New things that would last forever, like this new relationship. Things like that were said in the beginning. She said nothing in response. Her heart thumped day and night as familiar things slipped out of her grasp. She had a new family, new clothes, new jewelry, new shoes, new bras and panties, new bus routes, new four-poster bed. Then, 2 months later, a whole new city and an apartment so new there were no nails on the walls yet, no bed. In this city, there were no cycle rickshaws and no tongas. Trains snuffled down its length like the fat-flecked blood in her mother-in-law's arteries. It's an easy city, her husband had assured her. Step out of the building and there's the train station right there. Throw a pebble and you can hit it. It's that close. The cloth-strapped food bag had weighed down her left shoulder, and her mother-in-law's hand had pressed down on her right shoulder as they got off the train and waited for their husbands to emerge from the luggage compartment. Her husband had pointed to the new apartment. You could actually see it from the railway station platform. It was the tallest building east of the railway tracks, fourth window up, no balconies, black metal grills, and closed all the windows. I'm just going to stop the reading here. Basically, what happens in this chapter is that this woman is totally isolated, and her alienation comes not only from the newness of the city and unfamiliarity of it. it also comes from being a housewife. And this is something that I think, I mean, you hear of, this is something nobody talks about, but in India, Indian, perhaps rural areas too, but cities for sure, it has been documented that actually housewives are amongst the highest in terms of the rates of suicide, where people who die by suicide are more likely to be housewives than there are any other segment of the population. And I think isolation and alienation have a lot to do with it. Firstly, when a girl gets married, she's anyway leaving everything familiar behind, you know. Then she moves into a new city.
Yes.
But then she can't make her own friends because she doesn't have her own money. And it makes such a huge difference. Like in Bombay, I've seen this in trains. Women who get out of the house, women who have jobs, they will make friends in the train. They'll make friends in the buses. They'll make friends no matter where they are, in offices. But if you're a housewife, you don't have those opportunities. And well, that is one of the problems.
Yes, it's her story. I mean, this book is interwoven with so many stories that connect and intersect, and her story is very moving. And I love the way you allude to all of these stories without, you know, just there's no tell, it's all show. You know, you're revealing what happens to each person, each subgroup of people through just the incidents. So I think it's a good title, perfect title for the book.
Thank you.
Yeah, but there's yeah, you go ahead. Yeah,
I stole it from a Bombay film song. It's that old Hindi movie song, "Ye Bombay Shahar Hadson ka Shahar hai." So I stole it from there.
Okay. Oh, nice. Even more connections. But I thought it was interesting too, you know, I mean, we've been talking about people who've moved into the city and experiencing the city, both the magic and the isolation of the city. But it seems to me that even people who've lived there forever, who are part of the city, who probably were born there, we don't know, feel that sense of isolation as well. And I think time will permit. There's, you know, in the Woman Who Encounters Love chapter, there's the woman who seems to be so vibrantly at the center of everything, and yet there's this profound loneliness within her that comes through as well. Yeah, I don't know if you feel like reading some more, Annie.
Yeah, sure. I'll just open the light again if you'll excuse me.
Yes. And while Annie's doing that, I thought that a way to reveal the complexity and the layers that come through in her writing and come through in this novel about...
Apologies.
Not at all.
Apologies.
I was just telling the audience, you know, the reason I think these readings are wonderful is that it's sort of the relationship between the individual and the city somehow really emerge in your novel, you know, and so yeah, so I think the readings do sort of show that, and so I think it's nice to have them. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is from a chapter called "A Woman Encounters Love in Illicit Places and Watches Over Her Lover's Wife." So in the first, I'll read from the second half. The first half is about this woman who is out with her kitty group. She's part of a kitty group and they've been out partying. And on the way back, they watch this beggar making love on the railway bridge. But then after that, she comes back home and she's watching, you know, the pictures they've taken of the party, and she's reflecting about her own life now that she's come back to her apartment. And so I'll just read from this section here. The last thing she does before going to bed is to step into her 16th floor balcony and peer down. It is too dark to spot the 10th floor balcony below and to the left of her own. Not that it matters. She knows by heart the rhythms of that apartment. When the first cup of tea is made, how long the television plays, when the bedroom lights are turned off. She already knows that at this hour, only a tiny night light would be spilling out of the bedroom, filtered thick blue through the curtains and not quite reaching the balcony. She must be the only person in the world interested in the comings and goings of the woman on the 10th floor. That woman who does not smile back at her, does not castigate her, does not abuse or threaten her with exposure. She merely goes about the business of existing, quietly growing old. This woman often sits down in front of the dresser and leans towards the mirror, wondering if she herself is growing old at the same rate as the woman on the 10th floor. Afternoons are tricky. She has too much free time on her hands. This is the problem, really. Just too much alone time. It sits like a heavy-limbed beast on her hands, on her mouth, on her head. When she lies down, it sits on her chest. When she turns on her side, it crushes her hip bone. She needs a creative hobby, not shopping or clubs. Those are not real hobbies. The woman on the 10th floor doesn't have a hobby either. She doesn't even go shopping, hasn't joined any kitties. Well, good on her. She shouldn't have joined the kitty herself. She looks at the photos from the ladies' night on her phone and allows herself a mad moment. She mentally photoshops the woman from the 10th floor into this gaggle. It doesn't work. An image of that woman in black chiffon and a red pouty mouth refuses to form. She pictures herself telling that woman, "It's not expensive, not at all. I got the dress off a stall in Colaba that sells export reject mal from big labels. That's how I manage it. Cent% French chiffon. You could come with me sometime, I'll show you." In the photo, the scalloped edge of an electric blue bra peeks out from under the neck of the black chiffon dress she was wearing. She enlarges the photo. Funny that blue should show up under black. Her left breast stands out, a neon shade of midnight blue. She could send the picture to him. He would reply, though not at once. He would see the message tonight but pretend to be asleep or refuse to look at it until noon. She pictures him cautiously trying out the sound of the words in his mouth before replying, "That smile." Or it might be something worse than that, inanity. God bless. I'll stop there.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Annie. The other thing, we talked about this already, this idea of migrating to the city. And in Bread, Cement, and Cactus, I think you really, which for those of you in the audience who don't know, which is a sort of a memoir of, I think it's one of the most interesting and important commentaries on living in modern India somehow, and the transitions that everybody goes through, but the transition of landscape, of geography, of the urban world imposing itself on everywhere and so on. So it's brilliant. For those of you who haven't read it, please look for it as well.
Thank you.
But your own experience of living not in the city and then moving to the city, you talked a little bit about that. But I was also thinking, recently went to a lecture by Parasal Prabhakar, who is the the husband of Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, and he is quite critical of the current economy and situation. And he mentioned these incredible numbers. He said that over 2 to 3 crores of people have stopped working in agriculture, because it's just not viable anymore. And where do they go? They go to the city, I mean, there's nowhere else to go. It's like Dick Whittington in search of gold in the old rhymes. And so that experience of transition, again, has the positives and negatives, but it's also really a question of recentering one's own life, isn't it? And one's own experience of one's environment. So if you'd care to comment on that, I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks. I think, I mean, my experience was quite, in some ways, jarring. I have to say it's in many ways positive, but in many ways also quite disruptive. Because I grew up in a place that wasn't a small town. I sometimes say that I'm a small town girl, but to be honest, it wasn't a town at all. It wasn't a town, it wasn't a village, it was an industrial township. An industrial township in a rural setting, largely. I mean, you go 1 kilometer outside the gate of the township and there's nothing around, just a road and the hills and nothing else, not even one shop that's selling anything. So I grew up in this extremely isolated, and you must remember this is pre-mobile phones. We didn't even have our own phone, like an independent phone line. Yeah. So the isolation was near complete. I have experience of living like that. And I longed to get out anywhere, anywhere at all that wasn't there. And some of that came from not even who belongs to industrial township. Nobody belongs to industrial township. Industrial township belongs to people, and it belongs to the industrialists, effectively. So the question of belonging there was out of the question. We were all there temporarily, and we all knew that we were there temporarily. Some people, as long as their jobs last, students like me, as long as they could go to school, and they were waiting to go to college, places like that. I was waiting to go to college. I first went to a small town college. I went to Ajmer, and then from there I came to Mumbai. So I had lived in a small town. But the city of Mumbai, nothing prepares you for it. Nothing prepares you for the intensity. I mean, heat and dust is not the right word, because it's not so much dust, it's something else. You know, it's
grime.
The physical intensity of what you experience. And like I said, you know, the trains particularly, the intensity of that, the forced proximity with people's armpits being in your nose, you know, and not being able to do anything about it, and not because they want it, but nobody has any choice. And the anonymity and the sense of freedom, all of that. For me, that was very intense. Some ways liberating, but also very intense. But also very distressing. And I haven't written about this much, but so for example, I have written about this in my early days as a blogger, about how, as a journalist, one of the problems is that you don't really spend much time in the office as a reporter. You're not a good reporter if you're sitting in office all day. You know, you have to be out and about. The places where I was going were city courts, city police stations. There were no bathrooms. There were no bathrooms anywhere. And except for Churchgate Station, there was no functional bathroom for women in any of the stations I went to. So basically a woman out and about, and you just have nowhere to go. Or then the places you go are not clean, so your physical health is at risk. And these are things people don't talk about in cities, the viscerality and the sense of anger and shame that you carry around also, particularly as a woman. But I think in some ways, these are things that are also not just distressing, but also annoying, and they anger you. They fill you up with this sense of deprivation at all times. And this is something I certainly struggled with a lot in terms of cities. And I think I strayed a bit from the question you asked me.
That's all right. It raises the whole infrastructural aspect. I mean, the train is an infrastructural aspect, but most cities don't have the trains. But the whole infrastructural aspect of a city, and the sense that as a citizen, you feel nobody is in charge and nobody really cares to be in charge. And the politics and the power that are at play have somehow eroded the possibility of anything rational or logical or important ever happening sometimes in a city. And I mean, in Bangalore, for example, which was a fairly sweet and functioning city, but of course it belonged to a few for a long time. And the minute it exploded, it's that sense of anger you feel. It's like something that functioned has completely disintegrated because there's absolutely no sense of ownership that anybody feels about making this a place for citizens, in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. To come back to what you were saying, I think also I'd like to come back to that. I remember now what I wanted to say before I got derailed. I think one of the big problems in our in the urbanization of our country, we have become urbanized, and like you were saying, like for poor people, very often if you're desperate, you're leaving agriculture, or there's a drought or something else happened, people have always come to cities. But since independence, we have not urbanized in a coherent fashion.
Correct.
We haven't set up cities. We haven't planned cities. I think in the old days, in a limited way, perhaps, I am not backing this up with research, so maybe I shouldn't talk about it. But when, say, an old ruler or, a jagirdar or whatever, when they're establishing themselves, and they did it for completely selfish reasons, obviously taxes and tributes and sense of self-aggrandization. Oh, I can't pronounce that.
Aggrandization.
Yeah, they did it for those reasons. But they set up things to work around them. If it's your ilaka, if it's your fief, if it's your kingdom, you will set up a capital. And that capital becomes the center of things. And because there were many more of these, there were many more urban centers that were planned in some fashion by someone. Someone was thinking about these things. I think the capitals that we have, the capital cities, even now remain. We talk about immigration into cities like Bangalore, Mumbai, Chennai. I mean, the 4 or 6 big metropolises that we have, obviously they get the most number of people. But if you study the migration data, this is not that people want to do. People don't want to just up and leave and go to the nearest big city, to the biggest city. They very often want to go to the nearest big city to find work. Why would a farmer who's out of work get up from, say, somewhere near Jaipur and come to Mumbai? He first goes to Jaipur. If Jaipur doesn't give him something, he may go to Delhi.
Yes.
So very often the problem is lack of local industry, lack of local. And sometimes for some industries, there's another bigger problem. Say for the arts and culture, if you want to work in arts and culture, say you want to work in film, the only place that people can think to come to is Mumbai.
Yes.
They might come to, say, if they write, say, in Malayalam, they might think of going to other centers, or if they write in Tamil, they might want to go to Chennai. But by and large, everything is concentrated in 2 or 3 cities. Imagine the Hindi film industry, so-called Hindi. It's at least 100 years old, and since after partition, obviously Lahore was a big center, but then that went after partition. But 70 years is a long time. We have all these languages. None of them have developed their own local industries adequately to provide work and compensation and cross-cultural pollination between north, south, east, west.
Yes.
So obviously then, where does that leave people who want to work? They have to come to the big cities.
Yes, very true. And then it's interesting too, the transition that people from those big cities also feel with the influx of people. I mean, Kirtana Kumar just recently wrote a book on Bangalore called Bangalore Blues, and that very much both the nostalgia and in a sense, the tragedy of the transition, which just disrupts a city, is very much a part of it. And I think in Shubha Sundar's Boomtown Girl, again, she addresses this aspect of the transition of the city, which again, based in Bangalore, where suddenly this town has become a boom town, and what happens to people there, and who are they, and what happens to the sense of community, So that's kind of the interesting commentaries on cities. But there is, I want to not end on this somewhat sad, not end this segment on this somewhat sad note, because I again, coming back to Dada Pir, there's this segment where there's this teacher, and he's teaching in the heart of the city in Cottonpate. But even though he has to take the bus from where he lives, which is quite far away, every day, or he chooses to take the bus, he refused to, and I'm reading from the translation, he refused to consider moving to paying guest accommodation or to rooms in the commercial district of Cottonpate. When colleagues asked him why he didn't shift closer to the new school, his answers sounded silly even to himself. Too much air pollution, the rooms are expensive. These were excuses meant to shut people up, but the real reason he persisted in making the daily expedition was to be able to marvel. I come from a village in Bellary, and I'm taking a stroll through a city like Bangalore. And so there's also that sense of wonder and possibility that opens up. So, yes, I wanted to sort of come back to this whole idea of living in the city, and something you brought up right at the beginning, which is this idea of privacy also, particularly for people who live on the streets. And the way in which you somehow the core of you're buffeted by the geography, you're buffeted by the busyness, the lack of privacy, but yet you hold on to the core of yourself. And I think that really comes out beautifully in the I think was it page 92? I'm not sure, where the man is making love and thinks he has to hurry because, he's so vulnerable. There's danger everywhere, but then he can't, because that's not who he is. It's really beautifully written. I think it's page 92. Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I could have got the page number wrong.
No, I'll find it. It's 58, I think.
Okay.
I will just come to that. Yeah.
Yes. But there's another segment that I think we might close with this before before opening up, which is also about another migrant to the city, but we'll talk about her later.
Yeah. So this is a homeless man. He's a beggar, and he's the guy who the other woman sees, the night that he's making love. So it kind of takes off from that same note. He is mystified by his own patience sometimes. He should hurry up right now, for instance. Railway cops selling batons and rifles will be hopping off the trains now. They don't usually take the bridge, but what if they did tonight? 100 things could happen that are not supposed to happen. All it would take is one moment in which he becomes suddenly visible, therefore intolerable. The wrong sort of look on his face, a grin at the wrong cop, a scowl at the ragpicker's gang leader. Next thing he knows, there's another bloody incident in the city. A man like himself, he won't even become a statistic. He's not one of those who are counted. If the cops came by right now, he risks having his head split open. Nobody will summon a doctor. Nobody will drag him out to the government hospital at this time of night. Nobody will write out a death certificate. They will not even call one of those boys who gather the pieces of people cut down by the train. Nobody will ask why and whom did he ever hurt. He knows, yet he cannot bring himself to hurry. Slowly he moves, slow as the dawn of a day of leisure. I'll stop there. I kind of conceived of this man as, one of his other acquaintances or friends tells him that in Hindi, in Bombay, you often hear this phrase, Bhagwan ne tere ko bahut fursat mein banaya hai. Upar wale ne tere ko fursat mein banaya hai. And it is a kind of compliment. It means God has created you in leisure. Sometimes it can be kind of a bit of a critique in some sense. If people are slow moving or very, they do things in a leisurely manner, somebody may tell you that, you've been made at leisure. But it's also a compliment, because when God makes things at leisure, he also makes them beautiful. That, you can take the time to etch each detail of a face or something.
Yes.
So this is a man who, despite the circumstances of his life, has taken the time to appreciate the moment. The moment is all he has, this one moment in which, even if it's on a railway bridge, he's making love to somebody. We don't see who it is, but somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And he has decided that no matter what, even at the risk of death, no matter what happens to him, he can't hurry this up.
Lovely, really. Well, since we're in part of the Word Lab's city script, I thought that the section on words that you have, where this young woman has also, again, we're talking about this idea of moving to the city again. And I think that's so much a part of the experience. I think the reason one returns to that while talking about the city, it's so much a part of the experience of knowing a city is to see its wonder and its aggressions when you come from somewhere else. But this beautiful chapter you have, I think that was page 92. I had marked 92, and then I was trying to figure out what that is, about the trinket seller. And yes, and so I think it's a very beautiful, beautiful sort of expression of the transition that she's going through.
Yeah. So this woman is a migrant into the city, and she's married somebody her community doesn't approve of, and she's had to kind of, in that sense, struggle more than most people have to struggle. But she also learns that there's a difference of talking. People talk in a different way in this city. So here, this is the section on 92. Her sister-in-law is fierce, like a hawk. She used to envy those piercing amber eyes, the strength of her arms, the speed at which she could swoop down on those who crossed her. She herself was a hothead once, but she has learned since that in the city, it is better to use your mouth rather than your fist. Go on, hey, yeah, I'll show you. Whatever you want to show me. And then I'll show you something else too. Go home while you can. That's what they've taught her. In this city, you don't hold your tongue. You have to start talking much, much before your blood begins to rise. Don't let it get in your eye. Spit it out. Words are the long rope people give each other in this city. Cursing takes the edge off their rage. Warning others not to get above themselves allows them to look past the daily humiliations they are subject to. Where she grew up, words were song. Words were their special hoard, the one thing they could not lose. In her heart, they remained plump and vivid. Sheep, wool, berries, snakes, 24 words for cloud, soft, playful words for camel. What is the word for this feeling of craning her neck backwards, squinting at a cloud, and seeing in it the shape of a destiny? These are not things to which anyone gives tongue, not among her people. Her people would keep their tongues rolled up tight inside their mouths. A man who speaks all day is as bad as one who sleeps all day. In this city, there are long strings of words in every mouth, clank, clank, like the wheels of the train, the short thread of abuse and the long jasmine garland of seduction when they're trying to sell you things. Cost nothing to look. Come here. Who else will make you a heroine for 100? Honey's waiting. Where's the money? 50-50. I'm calling it quits. Take it away for 50. I want to go home too. It's late. Come on, do us both a favor. It's prettier than your fantasies. Come take it. Come loot me, my love. Better than kidneys. That's what this stuff is, I tell you. Better than kidneys and liver both. Stop.
Wonderful. So I return to the comment that I think through this book, you really see the city through its people, and you see the relationship of people to the city. So I think that's very special to do, because it's. But on the other hand, it's not. It's not a. Aggressive commentary on that. It's just so subtly interwoven with the pace of the city, the rush of the train, the energy of people's lives. So it's a wonderful way, I think, to open a City Scripts festival. So thank you, Annie. And yeah, we'll open up to questions if there are any, if people have any, and if not, we'll keep chatting. So Asha, I'm going to look to you.
Yeah, hi, we've opened up for questions, so we can perhaps we can chat a little bit more as the questions come in.
Yes, of course. So Annie, I know, of course, being running out of print, and I know your work, your short fiction, well, because, well, not all of it, but I know your short fiction. And I think your story, Sujata, which is, again, very much a story of migration and escape in some ways into a city, the liberation a city brings. It was in the out of print anthology. So, of course, I'm going to use time to show this off a little bit. And I also know your other story, Inverter, which is in out of print, which is set in a small town, really. And the energy in the two is very different. Again, you bring out the pace and the relationship of people, the relationship within a family. In Inverter, it's just a completely different experience. Now, with the City of Incident, the interesting thing is when I started reading it, I almost thought, oh, it's a set of, it could be considered a set of linked short stories, because many of the chapters stand in a sort of an independence. They have their own little narrative. And it's only as you proceed that you see the links. Why did you choose to structure the novel this way? Or was there a reason?
Yeah, I often just find myself falling into projects without knowing what they're going to be. So initially, I thought I was writing one story. I just wanted to write the first story about this man who's a cop and he's traveling in a female ladies only compartment, because typically women, even in cities like Mumbai is much better than most other cities, like relative to Delhi, for example. Many more women in public spaces, many more women in offices and streets and things, so you feel safer also. But there's also this unique experience of being a lone man in an all-female space. And this happened relatively recently. I remember that earlier there were no cops on the trains. There was an incident where there was, I think, a rape in a train compartment. Daylight, actually. But I don't know why they decided that at night cops should travel in the women's compartment. But they did. And sometimes you'll see female cops also, but mostly it's male. And I used to travel on the train at night and I used to look at them and I used to wonder how they feel, because I used to watch their body language change. There are these guys, and obviously they're cops, so they have to kind of hold themselves in a certain way and behave in a certain way and be stern and be masculine and glare at people. And here they were in the women's compartment and just, they weren't even meeting our eyes. They would mostly just stare at them, either their phones, or they'd stare at their feet, and they didn't know where to look and they didn't know what to do with their bodies. And I found that amusing. So I started writing that story, trying to think about how this space feels to this man. But then I also looked at other women who were looking at the cop, because, as much as he's looking at them or trying not to look at them, there are others who are looking at him. And how do the women feel about him being there? And how do they feel about each other, And so it grew from there. But I also had these like little snapshot memories of cities, like images that were kind of like burnt into my memory and they wouldn't go away.
Yes.
Like there is this image of this man who's sleeping under the flyover. He's, I don't know what he did or does or whatever, but he had a baby. Like both he and the baby were sleeping together, just out in the open. And I couldn't forget that just that image stayed in my mind. And until I sat down and wrote about it, I wasn't at peace. And then other memories, a lot of these are just stories that were built up out of snapshots of memories.
Yes.
And these are lives to which I don't have access, and I wouldn't even like to gain access. Because lives that are lived out in the open, they have no privacy at all. The last thing they need is somebody coming up to them and asking them questions about what is your life like, etc. And you know that I didn't want to do the extractive thing, but I did want to think about what does it mean for such a person to be in a city like this, and how do their lives kind of collide with the lives of others? Like, what is that intersection?
Yes, I can relate to that very much. I think at least two of my short stories are triggered by just such images. You pass them and they're gone, but they stay with you, and you cannot. You have to think about it. You have to think about them. Yes. Well, we have a couple of questions. One is from Zoya. Hi, Zoya. And she says, "Hi, Annie. Did you spend any time in Aligarh, UP?"
I've spent very little time in Aligarh. I have visited, but mostly it's been for when I was very little. My mother was studying. She went back to studies after her marriage. So my mother was doing her MA in Aligarh, and I was very little, maybe 1.5 or 2 years old. So I spent about a year and a half there as a baby. And then later I moved to Lucknow, and I did go back. I considered studying there when after my 12th, I went back to look at the place. And my mom said, "Go look at the campus. Do you want to study there?" But then after, I liked it, but I decided to go to Ajmer instead, it was an all-girls kind of environment. So I went there.
Which you've written about so wonderfully in Bread, Cement and Cactus. Really, that's just a wonderful chapter too. Andrea Rodriguez asks, in fiction, the city is transformed into a simulated reality. It is difficult to choose the elements that will create a replica of the real city in emotive and expressive ways. As authors, to what extent can we truly represent a city? Well, I think this is a true one of the true representations of a city. I think Chandrahasa's Arzi does that too in a different way through a particular character. But go ahead, Annie.
Well, I think when we think about the truth of cities, we also have to recognize that there are many cities within cities. I mean, as many people as there are in a city, there are those many true views of the city. If I decided to write a novel about, say, an old Parsi woman living in a bungalow in Mumbai, that would also be a true story. And anyone else who reads it would be like, who's she talking about? Who even lives like that? Who has such a big bungalow in Mumbai? But maybe only one person, but it is a true story. It is a true representation of that one life. So it is not useful to think about literature in relation to truth in that manner. What we can do is think about whether or not the author is being true to that one vision. Is that one vision being manipulated? Is that one story being manipulated so as to conceal or confine the truth in some manner? That is something we can question. And I think what I try to do, and perhaps what most writers try to do, but I certainly try to do this, is that in my writing, I try to remain true to that moment. It may be my experience, it may not be my experience. But when I'm accessing, say, through my own writing, if I'm trying to get inside the head of a woman whose shack has just been destroyed, I have to then try and be true to that. I can't then put my middle class self there. I have to think about what it means. What does it mean to not have a bathroom? What does it mean to have to spend money every day to access the public bathroom in order to take a bath? What does it mean? Where do you leave your children when you go to work? So those questions are the kind of truth you have to put to yourself before you can try and speak to others. You have to learn to talk to yourself first in an honest manner.
What a good answer, Annie. That's really, really well said. Someone says, from James Brunner. Hello, James. Did other cities besides Mumbai's experiences sneak into the incidents in this book?
That's interesting. I have actually lived in only 2 big cities. I mean, in a real way. I have visited lots of cities, but it's always been for a few days or maximum a month or something. Less than that, actually. I have mainly experience of Delhi and Mumbai. And Delhi has a very different vibe from Mumbai. So I don't think that has crept much. I have written about Delhi in my other collection of short stories, which is love stories, where again, I don't name the city, but some of those stories are set in my head, at least they're set in a place like Delhi. Mumbai has something unique to it. It's not just, say, the trains or whatever. I can see that since the full web of the metro came to Delhi, the city has changed. And in many ways, it's becoming more like Mumbai in the sense of the way people interact, the trains, the jostling, people's tolerance for, just being really up close in your face. That is changing because, when people don't have a choice, it doesn't change that year, but 5 years later, it does change. And I'm seeing that happen. But that wasn't in the time that I was there. So my experience of the city was very different. I experienced it as a flatter city, a wide open city, more heat and dust and less, sweat. So that is different. I think one thing that has crept in just a little bit here, I carry some memory of not being from Mumbai. I think perhaps that has crept into it, of looking at it and feeling it and being from it, but also being outside it in a manner.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that does sort of resonate with what I see in your writing. But it is interesting, isn't it, how cities do have their characters and why there are commonalities and infrastructural glitches which are everywhere. There's these cities just do have a certain character, and people adapt to that character as well, and so that's a very interesting aspect of living among a huge density of humankind, I think.
And apart from character, I just want to add to that, not just character, I think cities also have bodies. We keep talking about the bodies of embodiment of people and things like that, but I think there is an embodiment of concepts too. A city is a concept. And it has a physical body, like, the layout and the infrastructure and things like that. But it also has a body in the sense of your body in the city. We are all made up, basically, what are our minds, what are our characters? They are our bodies. And, the body's gone, everything's gone. So I think that the body of the city and the body of the person intersect, and that shapes the character.
That's very interesting. Yes. Yes. Maybe this will sort of segue into the next question, which is a long one. Let's see. Regarding the homeless character from the book, What is your view regarding the sentiments which homeless people have when they have incidents like privacy invasion or sense of loss when their home has turned out into debris on one fine morning? Apart from being vulnerable, aren't they in the same state as someone with all the privileges? So that's interesting. I think the book will reveal somehow how Annie deals with this. But Annie, if you would like to address it, I don't know.
Well, yeah, actually, the book is a response to kind of reflecting on these questions. But I don't think that their lives are the same at all. And when we say people being more vulnerable, the vulnerability is all encompassing. Vulnerability, I mean, the life of someone who is not homeless is so different, so dramatically different. Even if it's a tenuous hold on privacy or rights, the question of rights, the right to existence, even if you're renting, say, and you don't own an apartment, you have the right to be there. Connections you have. If you're not a homeless person, say you have friends, you have family, if you're in distress, you move into their space where you may have only a marginal right or a temporary right, but you can be there. If you're homeless, you don't have a right to be. If you're on the pavement, anyone can tell you you don't have a right to be here. And how does that shape everything else in your life? If you don't have a right to be somewhere, don't have a right to be on the platform, don't have a right to sleep, don't have the right to health, don't have a place to go to the bathroom. How does that, it's not just vulnerability. Even if somebody doesn't come and hit you, this constant sense that you don't have this right. That is why cities need to be shaped with the rights discourse. It's not enough to just say that give people facilities. It's also, you have to say that people have the right to these facilities. Mm-hmm. Only then does that experience change.
Yes. Well, I think that's a fine statement on which to end this session. And this session about the city, about writing about the city, about the way fiction addresses living in a city. Thank you, Annie, for a wonderful session. We talked about, everything from migration to the city, to alienation, to the infrastructure, to the trains, to the way in which your novel took shape. It was wonderful and enriching and generous of you. So thank you so very much. Thank you, IIHS and City Scripts, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Indira, and thank you, IHS. I've greatly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for your very sharp and reflective questions.
Oh, thank you. Well, I guess we'll be hanging up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for joining us. This was our opening session for City Scripts, and I think this was a great way for us to start. And thank you both for making the time for this. And Annie, we hope to see you in person whenever you're back. And Indira, we'll see you over the weekend, hopefully.
Yes. I look forward to being there in person.
Great. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. Please have a good weekend, and I hope to see a lot of you in Bangalore, at least at IHS.